Good morning, everybody. I am here with my friend Cidonie, and I am literally sitting here with coffee in rainy London. And Cidonie is currently with her glass of wine in the evening in the northern New South Wales in Australia on the Gold Coast. I'm very envious, and I'm sure it's beautiful outdoors. And I've been so excited to talk to you because, so we met, I guess it's like 2 or 3 years ago now, and we were on a trip with Condé Nast Traveler in Bermuda. And everybody was kind of paired up for stays. And then we met and we realized we were so similar in age, similar in travel, similar in our media background, like so many similarities. We couldn't even there was not enough time to talk during our time in
me, but on the other side of the world. I was like, I think I'm
on the other side of the world. And I mean, the more I learned about you, just incredible, like writer, editor, content creator, doing this amazing work. And also beyond Australia, having lived in Asia, I think it was China or Shanghai specifically for a number of years, living in the United States for a number of years. Yeah. And so, I mean, tell a bit about kind of your background in a nutshell, because I'm probably not doing the best job.
Yeah. So it's funny when I met you, because the more I spoke to you, the more I was like, oh, you are me from the other side of the world. I was like, you're like my doppelganger. And yeah, so I was always predominantly in media, been a journalist for over 20 years, and did that whole start in print. I was in magazines. So I was in Men's Health magazine and Marie Claire magazine in the early days. And then we went into that whole shift of print going into digital. And I was in the news by then. I was the Sydney Morning Herald. So and through that career was, as you know, such a crazy change from going from print to digital. And then I got the gig of doing some travel writing for Sydney Morning Herald, and I was doing some fashion and some travel, and I'd already loved doing travel anyway. But then I got to do some really interesting stories. And then my partner at the time got a gig living in China. So we were like, as a family, let's move to China. So I was like, right, I never say no to travel, so let's just go and live in another country. So I packed all my babies up at that stage, and that was mid through my career. I think I'd left... there was one point I remember thinking, I was like, I think I was fashion editor at Marie Claire or something at the time. And I'd just gone from being front row catwalk shows to then going over to living in China and trying to navigate China and starting again my career and in this big, huge city with 3 babies, with 3 little kids at the time. So that was crazy. But China was great. And then I got a job with a company called Ringier, which is a big publishing company. They're quite big in Eastern Europe and Africa and a lot of countries you wouldn't sort of hear about, but huge media company. And got to edit some fantastic travel magazines and food magazines and digital magazines. And I was in charge of about 20 different products there and in 5 cities in China, and didn't speak any Chinese and was trying to navigate media. And then they threw me into WeChat over there because obviously we didn't have Facebook and Google. So I had to learn, WeChat. So I was on the social media, learning how to do WeChat, social media, content plans and everything for this whole new platform, which was just crazy. But loved it. And then we moved to America. And when I was in America, I was working for the Texas Bureau. I was in Dallas. I was working for Dallas Tourism at the time, and worked for a couple of the digital platforms there and was writing. And that's when I met a couple of the bloggers in Dallas. And that's when that part came up where I got to meet you, and we were through Condé Nast Travel and through a couple of things that were happening there. So then I got thrown into doing that, and that was fun. And then I got whirlwinded back to Australia, and I've been constantly blogging and writing and editing. And as you know, as editors, we just are always in and out of work constantly, up and down. So it's
just a wild change, because you were in Shanghai specifically, right?
I was in Shanghai specifically. It was where so we were there for almost 4 years in Shanghai, so right in the city, right in the thick of it. Yeah, so it was pretty big and pretty full on. I was working right on the Bund, on the main part where all the hotels were, and it was pretty fantastic. We got to do some amazing events and amazing, 5-star amazingness in Shanghai. I mean,
what's crazy about it too is because I spent a lot of time in Shanghai around 2009, I guess 2008, 2009, and for people that don't know, I mean, Shanghai was kind of, you had Hong Kong, obviously, was always like a huge metropolis. It's an incredible city. And then you had Beijing, and Beijing's kind of like a government town.
Yep.
And then Shanghai was like the baby, but like a young Hong Kong. And then during those years in like it was 2006, 7, 8, 9, it just exploded. And you could literally see half the city building up and half of it kind of like...
It was, yeah. So the time I was there, it was on. Like Shanghai was like a city to be reckoned with, and it's
so fun. It's so fun. It still is, and a lot of advertising companies, both from the U.S. and the UK, have offices in Shanghai specifically as their outlet in Asia and China. It's fantastic.
Then they're on the pulse, and they know what they're doing, and there's a lot of fast everything there as far as like technology and infrastructure and business, and they're on the pulse there. You know, the fashion and the art scene is really, that's what I loved, sort of doing some stories on the art scene there, because it's such an amazing culture that's been quiet for so long. That part of it, the art scene and the fashion scene's been dormant for so long. They haven't really had the platforms to really show and shine. And
one of my favorite things is, and I keep on bringing up TikTok on the show, but like Chinese street fashion is just unbelievable. Like that's what I keep on looking at. I'm like, what's happening there? It's amazing. Like it's just so much more creative and everywhere. I mean, from China to Korea to a lot of different places, but just unbelievable. Japan.
So while I was over there, I got to do a lot of side travel. So I traveled all through Asia the whole time I was there, and got to do some, you know, because it was just like anything, you know, it's like, you know, in Europe, it's like an hour flight and you're in Japan, or an hour flight and you're in Malaysia. So, you know, we got to spend any holidays we had, any time off, long weekends, we would just skip off to another Asian country. So I was very fortunate to do a lot of travel around Asia, and also get to work there and work with the local culture as well, which was just fun and mad and exciting, and like I loved it. It was every part of it.
Well, we're going to delve into that, because traveling around Asia is such a phenomenal experience, and is so nuanced and so different, obviously, from anything we kind of grew up with in the West. And obviously there's a lot of influences, specifically Chinese influences, not just on I'm like forgetting East Coast, Australia, but also in Canada on the West Coast where I grew up. Yep. So there's a lot of similarities there. Also lots of Aussies in Vancouver. I think I told you this before, but in Whistler, we call it Whistler, because it's all Aussies like running the show up there. But I was just thinking, like, then again, how different that you come to the U.S., and not just the U.S., but Texas, and not just Texas, but Dallas. And that is like kind of its own planet unto itself. So that's another huge shift. A massive city. I mean, tons of business happening in obviously in Texas, and certainly actually in the last couple of years, a lot of people from around the West Coast have moved to Texas for both space and less taxes and all these reasons. But I mean, that was wild. And so I think when I met you, you were living there, and I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that you were in Dallas, because I was like, what
are you doing in Dallas that had just come from China? I know, right? It was me too. And you know, the funniest thing was, like, you're obviously very well traveled, and you were like, wow, like that. But could you imagine me having that conversation with the like local Dallas lady that I would meet? Like,
no,
I was talking to the local Dallas lady, and they're like, oh, so you're from Australia, amazing. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, oh, and I'm like, yeah. And I just moved from Shanghai, China. And they were like, what?
What?
Like, how does that work?
What do you mean? What do you mean? For sure. I get that look of confusion a lot too when I try to explain things in certain places. But you have to tell me where exactly. You have to describe where you are now, because I did a Skype call with you. We were catching up a few months ago, and it was so beautiful because you were showing me outside, and I was just.
Now, but,
I know, it's okay, but tell me. I mean, unbelievable.
Yeah, it's all dark outside. So I live in northern New South Wales region and of the east coast of Australia, which is right on the border of the Gold Coast, Queensland. So I'm smack bang in the middle, right on the border. And northern New South Wales is just this beautiful pocket of just natural, like pristine, beautiful land that is just, I don't know if you've heard of Byron Bay. A lot of people travel to Byron Bay.
Yeah.
There. Right. So I'm 30 minutes north of Byron Bay and an hour south from Brisbane. So we're tucked away. Like, to give you an idea, it's like I'm 10 minutes from the beach and like pristine, gorgeous beaches. But I'm also like 5 minutes from the rainforests and like the hinterland and like country. So I live on literally 10 acres of farmland with cows in the back paddock and bushland all around, and I'm 8 minutes from the beach. So it's just the best of both worlds. Like it's
heavenly.
It's
incredible.
heavenly. It is really, really beautiful. People are, starting to really wake up to how beautiful this area is, and a lot of people are starting to come here. It's known for its natural wonders here. It is just pristine and beautiful where I live.
How far are you exactly from Sydney?
So from Sydney, it's an hour flight. So I'm only an hour north on a flight, which is about 8 hours drive, I think. So to give you an idea.
With the pandemic specifically, obviously we checked in, I think, midway through and things were really bad. And I know Australia's had like a number of lockdowns, but has also stayed, like the numbers have been really low because like the borders were shut. But I remember at some point they were so strict that like states were shut, right? Or I guess you couldn't cross over unless you had a special pass. And I remember you telling me something about surfers, like where they would start at one place and they would just swim around to get to the other.
To the border. They've locked the states. They've done it. We're in a 3-day lockdown right now, and it's the same thing. Like, yeah, you can literally drive, park, and everyone gets their surfboards out and runs across the road and swim, and then surfs out, paddles around, comes back in. So they couldn't really restrict the water. Like they can restrict the roads, so they can't really stop the surfers from like going from one point around to the other. So that's like we're literally on the state border here. So it's quite funny on that front how they were trying to lock down the surfers in the water.
And you're probably better, like where you are has actually probably been ideal for this year in terms of you have the space and things to do instead of being like in a larger city.
And as you said, like, look, Australia's been really lucky compared to the countries overseas. I mean, we don't have nearly the bigger numbers as what you guys have, and we don't have the population either. So everyone has their opinion, and everyone's, got all their opinions on how the governments have handled it and the vaccinations and everything like that. But I truly think Australia's done a really, really great job of getting ahead of it really quickly, and we tend to, I think, do the right thing, and we don't have that many transmissional cases. So
I guess we should delve into these questions because we have so much to talk about. But I will say to whoever's listening, like later on when we kind of delve into women in media, it's going to be a really good conversation because we have a lot to say about this, having been at the preface of so much change. And this is always a big crux of a lot of our conversation. But let's start with the travel because there's been a lot. And I know it's different, again, growing up in Australia where Australians love traveling a lot. They always say Aussies and like Canadians and like Argentinians, like there's a few crews that really do a lot of travel because of their location in the world.
Yeah.
And I know that even when I was backpacking in my young days, those are kind of who I came across all the time. So what was the first trip you remember taking as a kid and then as an adult?
Yeah, well, the kid thing, like obviously as a child, I didn't travel too much. It wasn't until I backpacked as well. I took a year off and backpacked, and it's probably the most memorable because I wasn't a teen backpacker. We weren't really young. Most Australians' rite of passage is you finish school and you take a year off. Like a lot of us,
the gap year.
Yeah, we'll go travel when you're 18, 19. I didn't. I went to uni, got back in, and went to uni, finished my journalism degree, started working. And then at the time, then met my, boyfriend at the time, and he wanted to travel, and we were like, let's go. And we took a year off and backpacked. So that's probably the most memorable time I remember as being, I think we were like mid-20s, like youngish, 24 sort of thing. So we felt like we were the oldest on the backpacking circuit at the time because, everyone follows it. But I was only like 24 when I look back on it, but I felt so old backpacking at that time. But we did, we went Australia to Turkey, and we did a month in Turkey. We went around the world the opposite way. So we went straight to Turkey to Greece, Greece to Italy, up to Europe, all the way along that way. And then we ended up in the UK and did all UK, I think, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, that sort of thing. So we did around the world that way. So, and we spent a year.
So nice.
Yeah. And
I tell everybody too, because I did the same thing. I delayed my gap year. I think I was like 19. I was in school for a bit, and I was like, no, I should probably take off for a little bit. And I tell people all the time, I mean, this is a normal thing for a lot of Europeans, certainly Australians, even Canadians. And it's not a thing in America, but I really think it should be.
Yeah.
Like, certainly, having that global perspective, it's not even part of the education curriculum. And I think it's so key. And I think I would encourage that for anybody.
Yeah. And everyone's like, oh, no, you won't get back into the workforce or you're missing out. And I was like, I had
you're not.
I got back into the workforce, no problem. And I was, it's probably at that 24 age. I wasn't like a, 18-year-old, and it was like fine. It was absolutely fine. And what you learn and what you grow as a person during that time is exponentially what you would do in that 1 year of, working in, corporate land.
Oh my God. So much more education too. I mean, I think too, we all grow up in this bubble and we think we know things, which we don't. We're idiots under 20. And then we travel, and all of a sudden you're fending for yourself. You're learning to be quick on your feet. You're like exposed to a whole bunch of different kind of lifestyles. And you're like, oh, this is so much bigger than me, which is how your brain's working as a teenager.
And things don't go to plan when you travel. That's what we know. Like, you can't, even if you have a plan, something will, go out of your hands. And you have to, I think travel is a really great thing when you're young to work out that you can only control so much. You can plan all you want. Travel's out of your control. Like, things happen, airports and weather and restrictions, and you have to be resilient. You have to think on your feet, and you're away from your family and friends, and you can't just call mum and help. You have to be able to work on it in a foreign country, and maybe not in a country that speaks your language, and you have to sort of, those survival instincts have to kick in.
100%, and it's just part of life too. I mean, I think it's the first time you're like, oh, this is literally how it's going to go. You got to be prepared for anything. And so I do think it's so key, and I know that things have probably changed a lot too. I mean, I think back to that age when we were probably both backpacking, how easy it was, right? It was just different times. It's just crazy to sit here and think about it. But like, you had one Eurail ticket, no problem, hop on, hop off. You had like a plane ticket you could easily change. The security factor was like nil. I mean, it was just, there were just not the same issues. Yeah. And I still see like young kids traveling all over the place. I mean, certainly here in Europe, I see them I used to see them all the time, not currently, but, it's just important to do. And I think even exploring, it's not about like having all this money, because it was less expensive for sure at the time. Yeah. But I think I keep on saying to people when I meet them, I'm like, I'm not telling you to have $1 million in travel, but it could even be exploring something in your own city, or you could be your own country. Like, my favorite thing to do is to road trip around and figure out and see things. And for a country with landscape like Australia, it's incredible. So many things to see. Yeah.
It makes you an explorer. And I think you either are or you aren't. And I'm, as you were saying, like even in my local areas now, I'm such an explorer. Like, I still love checking out as soon as there's a new coffee shop open, or there's a new art gallery in my own backyard, I'm there. Like, I have to check out what's happening in my own, locality. So you don't have to be going to like the big countries overseas to really explore and do some fantastic things in your own, area that you live in.
No, I love that. And I think a lot of the women I'm speaking to on this, the big common thread is curiosity. Like, it's what's driving them to explore, right? And just like you said, it could be something in your own backyard, your neighborhood. It could be somewhere across the world.
Something in our DNA. What makes someone more like one to explore than others?
Yeah, because the whole when I hear things about safety, I'm like, well, but safety's sort of an illusion. Like, when people think, even in their hometown, that nothing's going to happen to me, like, that's not true.
No, it's not true.
I mean, it's not true. So anything could happen. So in terms of exploring, was there a particular movie or book that inspired you to explore the most? Yeah,
funny. And something, actually, back in grade 12, I had Duck's ancient history. Actually, that's where my love of travel came from. I loved ancient history, and I loved the idea of all, like, any sort of ancient monuments around the world. I just, like, my bucket list was like, I need to go where all the ancient places are around the world. That's what I wanted to do. And I remember I duxed ancient history for school, and they gave me a certificate and like a little medal sort of thing, and they gave me a book, and it was the top ancient wonders around the world, and one of them was Machu Picchu. It was on the cover. And I remember getting this award on stage as I was like 17. And I remember looking at it and I was like, I'm going to go there. And
yes,
it's funny because my whole life, I was like, if I never get that's the one place I wanted to go. And that sparked my whole curiosity and adventure to try and see ancient civilizations around the world. And I only just got to South America, I think it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and I finally got there, and I did a solo trip to Machu Picchu. So so I felt like I've like ticked off 50 other countries around the world before I got to there, but it just hadn't aligned that I could get there just with everything else in my life that was happening. And I remember that was a defining moment. I remember being in Dallas and thinking, I know I'm not going to be here for much longer, and thinking I'm so much closer to it now in Dallas than I am in Australia. And I remember just thinking, I have to go now. And I can't remember, it must have been very close around the time I've met you, either just the year before or must have done it the year before I'd met you. And I just remember thinking, it was like a life change. I was like, I have to go now. I don't know why, but it was a major tick for me of travel moment. And for me, it was so much more about an entire life goal than it was just a country. So Machu Picchu meant a lot to me when I finally went, and I did the solo trip by myself and, did the camp and did the whole trek up and did it by myself and with a group, and absolutely loved it. Absolutely.
Oh, that's such a powerful moment. It's funny you say about the historical context, because I'm the same way. Every time I see whether it's a documentary or a movie reference, or I read something in a book that has something like that, I immediately go and look it up and explore. And there's so many of those still on my list. So that's like, I haven't been to South America. I have not been to Peru yet, but that is definitely on my list. Yeah. So it looks amazing. And so kind of on the heels of, in terms of pop culture, something I always ask too is there a particular album or song you associate with a special place or trip? And I get the weirdest answers because they're so random. It could just be one thing.
I do remember walking. I do remember doing Ireland and Dublin and listening to U2. And I know that sounds so cliche, but I just remember that like nothing else. I remember listening to the U2 while I was walking around Dublin, and it just meant so much more because I was listening to it as I was walking around. So
listen, we love the cliches. That's the point. You're like in a movie. You're like, all of a sudden you catch yourself in that moment. You're listening to the song or a track and you're like, where am I? What is happening? How did I get here?
It's not like I sort of planned it that way, but I remember listening to them going, and it sounded so like just epic, like, because I was actually in Ireland listening to that amazing, band, and
Oh, I'll do that all the time. I'll seek out bands too, or certain songs that I know from like certain places, and I'm like, well, I'm here, so I'm just gonna redo it, because sometimes you hear things differently too. So I definitely get it.
And now when I listen to them, I can't help but think about all the time that I was like hanging out in Irish pubs, and it was like loads of fun,
make new associations with it. And it's funny, like going back to the books and the history too, because I guess aside from Peru, do you remember there being like a historical woman who comes to mind as an inspiration for you, or any current ones that kind of encourage you to travel or explore? Yeah.
I thought about that question, and no one really famous, but then I thought of the obvious one for me, and I was like, of course, my auntie in my family was the first traveler, and she backpacked in 1979 with a girlfriend. With a combi van, and back in 79, 80. And I remember her stories. Like at the time I was, I think 4 or something. And I remember her coming back with little trinkets from around the world and all little things. And she's been telling me stories for like my whole life. And she totally I felt like pioneered it. Because back then it's just like, can you imagine 2 Australian girls going to Europe, buying a combi van and traveling all around? And that was like late 70s. I think it was 79, 80, like just such a different time in the world. So her stories really inspired me. So ever since then, we come from a long line of girls in our family, all our girls, all the cousins, all the sisters, we're all travelers. Like we've all done. Oh, in our family, so it's nothing new. We're the one, like I talk to like some people, like, wow, you've traveled so much. We're at the Christmas table. Our family is like this. And everyone's like, we don't want to hear that. Like everyone's just like, whatever, you've been there. We're all like, everyone's been everywhere. So it's not like everyone's like, oh, you're so cool because you've traveled. We're like, no one wants to hear it because everyone's traveled more than everyone. So
that's so great. I love that though. Do you feel like part of that comes from being Australian, or do you feel like that's kind of a unique thing to your particular family?
I think it's both. I think it's unique to our family because I come from a long line of very strong women. We've got like generations of strong independent women in our family, and we've all become travelers. Like all of us have traveled like extensively. Like, we're not, all the girls have traveled like everywhere. So it's, we're the kind of ones that are like, I'm going like, going on a solo trek to Machu Picchu, and they're like, oh yeah, cool.
I love hearing that though. I love hearing that. I was thinking too that I've seen more and more like some aunts that I know, and sometimes it's mothers, daughters, but that instead of kind of for birthdays, instead of buying a gift, it's more like, where are we traveling? Like, your gift is traveling to a new place every year. It doesn't have to be super far, but it could be like, what's our destination? And I think there's something really nice about that, to plant the seeds, certainly for somebody young coming up, and just normalizing it, and it'll just make them so much faster on their feet. I think that's fantastic.
I think in our family, it's a pretty, like, just a great, we just all believe in travel. We believe in that as an educational thing. We've got a long line of independent, strong women in our family, so it's a no-brainer. We've all done that. So it might be unique to some families. To our family, it's a pretty normal event for travel. So it's part of our culture, of our family, actually. You know, a lot of Australians have travelled. Australians kind of travel in two ways. It feels like you're either the Australian who needs to go overseas, like we're talking before pandemic, but and you would go extensively travel overseas. That's why you see so many Australians. And because we're so far away from everything, if you're going to go, you go for minimum 3 months, because it takes so long to get over there. So
that's right.
2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year, like that's normal for us. Or you're the Australian who is the local adventure traveller. Like, and there's nothing wrong with that either. You get a lot of Australians who are like, yeah, I haven't been to Europe, but, you know, I've had a van and I've trekked all around Australia, and I've done road trips all around Australia. I've camped and had a van and just lived out of my van for a year and travelled around. So, like, that's a normal thing for Australians too. So I do think there's kind of like two types of Australian travellers. There's the local offbeat road traveller that just loves Australia and they'll just keep travelling around locally. And then there's the ones that, need to get overseas.
So then, in terms of like of international travel, what foreign cultural experience had the biggest impact on you? Or one of them?
So I think the biggest one was in my time when I was talking about backpacking for a year. When I travelled for a year, the second part of that time, I volunteered and lived in Nepal for 6 months. And we lived in a remote part of Nepal called Pokhara, which is the landing strip where everyone does all the big hikes to Everest and Annapurna and such. And I taught English in a local little school and literally lived like with a local family above. I lived with no running water, and I lived above a buffalo shed for 6 months. And
that's so fun.
that was interesting. That was amazing. That was the other type of travel. So like I've done every kind of travel. Like I can't tell you. So
you really have.
Yeah, I did that for 6 months, and
wow.
I have to say, still in my memories, like it is still. I mean, and I've had some pretty amazing travel moments in my life, as I said before. Like we talked about Shanghai, and and amazing cities and amazing experiences, but living rurally with a local family in that situation was still one of my strongest memories. It was basic and rural and rough and hard and epic. It was amazing. Like I loved it. I loved it. It was hard, and I learned so much about the culture and the people and simplicity of just what can make you happy. That the simplest things can just make you so happy. And I would. It
really is true, because we're so used to like crazy consumerism everywhere in the West, and it's funny because I had a later question, but I'm going to slot it up here because I think it actually fits in, and that might be the answer. It might be somewhere else, but where were the happiest people that you've ever met or been among, like who seemed to have it right? And it might be based somewhere like that, where it's based in simplicity. Yeah,
and that was it. Like I've traveled extensively through the world. I've seen, I've lived in, I've as a tourist, I've been to a lot of places, and I've lived in a lot of places. And when you live in a third world country and you really live with the locals and you live like them, and not in a hotel where you're just visiting in and visiting out, I got to really experience their culture and their festivals and their life and how they ate and played with each other and how the family dynamics worked. And it was really, I remember thinking how beautifully happy they were with nothing. Like absolutely nothing. And it really, that I was quite young at the time, and it touched my heart a lot in how much we take for granted just the simplest things. Like some of the memories I remember living, because I was the house I lived in was attached to like the boarding school where the kids went to school, and so I would go in there for meal nights. and some of these kids would have, like we call it, like Tuesday night was chicken night. And we're like, yay, chicken night. And I'm not joking. These kids we couldn't even work out what they were eating. It was like little bits of like tiny bits of like gristle. But what we worked out, and I looked at it and I was like, it's not even chicken. What is it? Like, and these kids were so happy because they were getting chicken and not dal, bhat, and rice. And they got protein for once a week. And when I looked at it, I couldn't work out. Eventually we worked out it was the chicken neck. It was the bones of the chicken neck and the gristle. And I just remember going, oh my God, these kids have never eaten a breast of a chicken or a thigh. Like, they've never even eaten the part of the chicken that we eat all the time and they were so happy. They were getting a bit of protein. And I remember thinking, wow, like, and they were just like, they were so happy. Like, it was just ridiculous how happy they were just getting this tiny little bit of icky chicken neck. And times like that, and you just remember the kids on the roads just playing with, tires and rocks in the street, and they were just happy. They didn't have... Yeah.
Well, I think the big part of that, too, I think, is being in the moment, as it were. Like, isn't that kind of Buddhism 101 about being present or present in the current moment? Yeah.
Yeah, and people were just happy, and then everyone would sing and dance after dinner and have... those beautiful, you hear about that common thread with Indigenous cultures and third world country cultures is, the common thread of dance and music and bringing them together after mealtime, and how mealtimes is such an important part of their culture. It brings everyone together. And when you live it and you see it and you see they're so happy, and what they
connection and joy, which are two things that, ironically, being in the West where we're supposed to have an abundance of everything, we have less of those two things.
Meal and dance and sing afterwards and bring all the family together, and it's like, what else is in their life? What else is there? We get so confused of like what makes us happy, and then and that's a common thread in every third world country. That's a similarity, like in every Indigenous culture around the world. That's the same thing. They do it in different ways, but they're all doing that the same way in just slightly different ways. And
100%.
Yeah, and
you see it everywhere. I mean, certainly with Indigenous populations in both Canada and the U.S., it's such a fundamental part of community, right?
Yeah.
And it's
of community, course, bring the families together and bonding over a simple meal, and then just having some fun with some music and dancing. And that's what I remembered most about living there. And I have seen that reflected in other countries. Obviously, like, I've been to Thailand and Fiji, and I've been to a lot of other Indigenous countries that this happens as well. But because I lived there and got to live in a local home with a local family,
you had that experience.
It was amazing. Yeah.
Well, I guess then on the other end of food, with a gluttonous end, what was the greatest culinary experience that you had in another country? It's probably a lot, given where you've been.
I have so many, but in Shanghai, I have to say this was, so going from, here's the juxtaposition between one to the other. Like, we're just talking about eating like tiny little bits of chicken net. When I was in Shanghai, I got to review all the top, latest restaurants and
that's a good one in Shanghai.
You can imagine one to the other. And we're talking about the richest, like, high-end restaurants you would ever come across. Now, one I went to was called Ultraviolet, I think it was called. Have you ever heard of that? I think it's the most expensive restaurant in China. It's called Ultraviolet. I think it's from Paul Perriot, which is a French restaurateur. And it was anywhere between $600 and $800 for like, and they do like a degustation, like 20 courses kind of thing. But it was wild. It's a sensory experience, so you can't. It's like it's booked out 6 months ahead, and then
is it in the French concession at all, like in that area?
Yeah, it's a private, like it's in a beautiful private place, and the sensory experience. It's all about it's all about the five senses. It's about your touch and the feel and the sounds and everything. So it's not just a meal. I think they bring out about, if I remember right, it was about 20 dishes, but that was just extravagant. It was amazing. Like, that was
kind of amazing, all the different kind of food that you find there. And if people don't know, also, like, the French specifically had kind of well, we know there's been a lot of colonization and movement that shouldn't have happened in the past, but there was the French were in Shanghai just like they were in Vietnam, and so they've left these kind of different impressions behind. So there's still a big French food culture influences there.
A lot of people don't realize that about Shanghai. There's a huge French culture there. Yeah.
And I mean, the local food is phenomenal, off the charts too, but it's like a really interesting mix there because
I have so many stories about China with food. Like we could just keep going on that, but we won't. I mean, going in China and going down the side alleys, that's a whole other story. So
it's a whole other story. And the thing that always kills me too is when people are like, anytime you're in a Western country, people always speak about like, oh, we're going to order in Chinese. But if you're in China, that's like, there's a billion different regions. There's a billion different types of foods. It's like an impossible thing to like, to nail down.
It's different from the north to the south. And as you know, like everything's different. Like Beijing food's different to Shanghai food's different to like, up north, and so there's all the different foods from the different provinces. Now
I'm just hungry for hot pot. That's like that was my comfort food when I was there. It's like that's what I'm craving.
I can't remember now. It's been a few years since I've been there, but the hot pot was amazing as well. So
hot pot's amazing, and any kind of like soup based stuff is always comfort. I always think about like Vietnam too. Did you ever see that Bourdain episode with Obama in Vietnam? When they were sharing noodles, like in the local, I mean, those are always the best shops. You just go for some local goods, street food. It's always the best. Food in China
is amazing, and it's not like the food we have in the Western countries. It's very different. Yeah,
good. And very fresh too. Yeah. Whenever I always preface this question, or it doesn't mean a negative connotation, but was there a destination that pleasantly surprised you or thrilled you the most? You might have already been happy to go there, but it just like knocked you sideways.
One of the most surprising places, and you're going to have to, I can't remember what it was called. One of the most surprising places in America was when we drove up to, where is Dolly Parton land?
Oh yeah, Dollywood. That's in Tennessee, in the Smoky Mountains.
Okay, I did not do my research properly, and we wanted to get the log cabins, and I wanted to I was like, I want to go to Tennessee and get the log cabin, and I want to do like the fall leaves, and I want to go hiking in the wilderness, and we're going to see a bear, and I was taking the kids, and I'm like, this is the American Smoky Mountains. I'm like this is going to be such a great road trip, and then I was like, what the hell is this? It was like Dolly Parton World. And the amusement parks and I did not do my research well enough. And
it is a full-on amusement park in the middle of Smoky Mountains. It's quite the experience. It's on a lot of people's bucket list, but it is like, it's wild.
I just didn't do I was dreaming of log cabins, and I wanted to do and I just didn't do my research properly that time. And I mean, the kids had a ball. They thought it was like but I was just like, I just wanted to get them out to the wilderness and do some sort of and we spent our whole time in amusement park. So
it's so wild too, because of course people like Dolly, who's the most phenomenal person, and so many other famous singers, I think Loretta Lynn too. A lot of people grew up like in the Smoky Mountains, and of course that area has always been, it's beautiful, but very poor and very desolate. And so it's part of her like embracing where she grew up. And even though she's in Nashville most of the time, she still celebrates where she came from. And so they built this, it's where it is remote. Like it is a hike. You have to really make a plan to go out to Dollywood. Yeah. And it's just phenomenal. I mean, like we'll add a link to it just so people can explore, but it is something else.
That was probably the most surprising trip I've ever taken. It was not what I expected. I remember thinking I read something about it, and in my head I was just like, oh, it'll just be, like an amusement park off the back somewhere. All I'm envisioning is going on this amazing road trip with the mountains and cabins and see a bear and hike, and there was all that too. That was beautiful, but to go through that town before you go is just like, what? And you can't describe it. It's huge, isn't it?
No, and it really is such a slice of Americana in the way that like there's even, it's different, but there's old Wild West towns, for instance, where my mom's from in Colorado, and all these places have now been turned into like gambling towns, or like have a Wild West experience, or like all these things to like touch upon. And of course, Dolly is so iconic that it's just kind of amplified. But really, Tennessee is an interesting place because you can do, Nashville is such a fun and exciting town for so many reasons, certainly in music and food. And then doing like day tours, like whiskey tours and barbecue tours around the state. And then like heading towards Dollywood. All those things together could be one hell of a road trip for somebody, but I don't blame you being like very surprised.
That was the most surprising trip I think I've ever taken for surprise.
And so on the opposite end of the spectrum, growing up where you did, again, I always talk about local experiences that are kind of eye-opening. So do you remember having local experiences that expanded your global knowledge, or any favorites that you grew up with, or something that you had as an experience in Australia growing up that kind of opened your eyes to another culture or wanting to go somewhere else? A lot of times it's a restaurant for people, which it doesn't surprise me because food's the gateway, but sometimes it's a conversation you had with somebody.
Yeah, not really. I think in Australia too, back when I grew up, we weren't known for our culinary experiences. We weren't really known for, Australia became very multicultural in Sydney, in the cities, because we had a big multicultural base. But up here where I lived on the Gold Coast, it was very Anglo-Saxon still. It was very, it wasn't a lot of multiculturalism. So we didn't have a lot of overseas influences in culture around us. It was still very... one-dimensional with food. It was very English still. So that didn't sort of broaden my perspective. When I lived in Sydney, it did a lot more because we were really thrust into more of a multicultural environment. I got to eat a lot of different flavors from different parts of the world there. And they have some fantastic, huge Italian and Greek and Lebanese communities in Sydney. And the delis, like the deli foods and things like that, which are probably very normal for everyone overseas. But in Australia, that wasn't as big. So now in Australia, obviously we're really known for our food now, and it's really starting to take off. But
there's a big food scene both in Melbourne and Sydney now. I'm reading articles about chefs that are moving there.
I think now what's happening is the food scene's exploding here because chefs are starting to realize how our natural produce here is just phenomenal. So what they can do with food here is just phenomenal. So what we're really lucky with is, as I was saying, like where I live, we're right on the ocean. So we've got all the fresh seafood, obviously we're right on the ocean, but our farmland is, the soils in our farmland, especially where I live here, the basin of the farmland here is old volcanic soil. So where we live now is the volcanic soil, like 10 minutes from me, there are like avocado farms where people doing like microbreweries and starting up like beer breweries everywhere in the middle of an avocado orchard. So like there's that kind of thing happening. There's that whole paddock to plate thing. Everyone's doing farm fresh, farm to table, restaurants, very fresh, very, people on the farm. You can literally pick your produce, cook it. It's on your plate, it's done. So, and we're still right near the beach. So we have that real diverse between having beautiful, rich farmlands that are producing amazing fresh produce right near the ocean. So the combination of like rural farmland foods and ocean fresh foods together, I think, the chefs are coming over here and just being like amazing. And as far as what is Australian food, like we're really fusion orientated because we have that. What I was just saying, where we've got a real combination of an English heritage, which is backed with a multicultural New Age heritage, which has come together. We've got this amazing fresh produce. So it really is a melting pot now of what is Australian food is really starting to become more just, chefs being creative with what they can get, really.
So if you then, and you've already lived in so many places, but if you were, let's say you had a year and you could go live in a different country tomorrow and everybody was on board, where would you go?
I think right now, because I've done the big cities and I've done third world type, lived there as well, and I've done big. Right now, I'd be happy if I could just go live a really simple life on an island somewhere. If I could just go get a beach shack on an island and shack up in Fiji, or live the rest of my life doing that, I'd be happy. Yeah, I don't have an absolute I want to live, in a chateau in France or anything anymore. I feel like I've done a lot of travel and I've lived overseas in a lot of places. So
Yeah. You've had those experiences
yeah,
already.
I have. So, and again, when travel opens up again, we all have a few, more on our bucket list we want to, tick off. But I'm very thankful that I'm in a really great space with travel. I've done a lot of travel before now, so I'm not burning to like go to that one place that I need to get to, but I am hanging to just, yeah, just get out again and just go somewhere and relax.
Listen, an island is a good place. Well, the thing too with so much travel is that it makes you a really efficient traveler. So I know that I kind of have these things, but do you have a routine or certain priorities when you travel to a new place?
Oh, I'm pretty hopeless. I'm a real last minute packer. So I'm not one of those people that's like, I really should as a blogger, travel blogger. I did try to do all these like travel blog ideas on how to pack and everything, but I'm pretty last minute. I have all my luxury things that I like everyone else has their own thing. I'm really big on making sure I have the right skincare and moisturizers and things like that when I travel. I'm really big on that. Sleep for me is really big, so I have making sure that I've got like my eye pillows and I've got my eye masks and stuff like that, especially on long flights. And we all have our tricks when we're on a flight on what to do to get the best out of a long flight. So I'm
the same way though. I think you got to just hydration. And you have to kind of like plan for spontaneity. Like you can have certain things that you want to see, but like when people itinerary to death, you're in trouble. And then if you don't have any kind of research, you're in trouble. So I always know like, oh, here's a restaurant I want to try, or I know I'm going in this area. I've looked at the map. Here's a museum I have to hit. Like those things.
Like I'm very much like, I really want to go to that one restaurant. That's my one restaurant I want to see. I really want to see this one, gallery or something that's in town that I really want to see. And, I really want to check out this one amazing hotel, or something like that. And I might book, a hotel, but I might not book the whole thing. Like I like to sort of get a bit of a diversity when I travel too. Especially when I go to remote places. Because I'm a bit of a yin and yang, you probably now get that I like a 5-star and I like third world. Like I actually like both. And I can still do that now. And I often, like I remember when we went to, even when I went to Malaysia, I did this, I went in and then I booked this most amazing 5-star hotel, and it was expensive. It was on a private island. It was one of those, chefs, everything included, beautiful. And, I couldn't afford a whole week there. I just couldn't afford it, but I really wanted to see it and experience it. So I worked out my budget and I was like, I can do 3 nights. So I did that for 3 nights, and then I did Cheap and Cheerful in town and did a really, dodgy
That's perfect. No, but it's perfect. It's that high-low is like the perfect way.
Yeah, and then I got to do the high-low. I love that. And then when I was doing the low, it was great because by then, I just wanted to check out the local markets and the local restaurants. And I love doing that with travel.
You and I have talked about this before, and I think a huge miss, both from a lot of, it's getting better, but in media coverage or in advertising campaigns and stuff, it's like, are you supporting and exploring the community that you're in? Like I see so many people that travel, and it's just to like say that they were somewhere and then they're not going anywhere to really like to integrate into the area and to touch upon those other things.
The local food, and not in a restaurant, in a hotel. If you're not down the alleys, in the back streets, and if you're not eating the local food where the locals eat, if you're not eating local food like the locals eat, it's almost like you can't say you've been in that country. That's when I say to people, did you only eat in the hotel or in the resort? I'm like, did you even go to the country? Like, for me, it's like, did you even go? Like, because you ate the Western buffet, like you didn't even get to, like, I'm a bit rude about it. I've had people go, oh, yeah, we stayed at, such and such hotel. And I'm like, oh, great. Did you, go to the local market? Did you go to the local restaurant? Did you go eat where the locals eat? And they were like, oh God, no, I couldn't do that. And I'm like, well, did you even go?
It's shocking to me. I still hear it all the time. And oftentimes it's people that also have the most access, or maybe the most affluent, or the ones that are actually doing the least exploring. And I don't say that as a rule. I'm not saying for everybody, but I've definitely noticed that as a pattern, and I don't understand it at all. So kind of on that note then, what would you like, what are the greatest lessons from traveling then, kind of through all these shared cultural experiences that you now apply to your life?
Being able to ask people and talk to people about their life. Like, I think the greatest thing when you're in travel and you're over there and, you go and you can sit in a cafe in a foreign place and you can strike up a conversation with someone. And I remember having the most fabulous conversations with people in other countries in a diner or in a cafe and them then telling me, hey, my uncle actually owns a, restaurant down the street and they're having a party tonight. Did you want to go? And I was like, yeah, okay. And then that would never have happened had I not have gotten out into the culture. And then talking to people, striking conversations with strangers becomes an art form. And a lot of people have a hang up about it. And at the end of the day, I always say there's more good people than bad people in the world. And people are always genuinely trying to help you. People are so worried when they travel they're going to get mugged or ripped off or, taken for a ride. And of course there are all of that. But in my experiences, there's so many more great people out there that are so willing to share their life and their experiences and their culture. And they really just want to showcase. Everyone is very patriotic and proud of their country. Everyone loves what they do. And if they can show a foreigner and have that foreigner's eyes light up when they taste their food, it's pride. It's absolute pride. And I don't think there's anything greater than, I've been invited to so many people's homes when I've traveled just by having a nice conversation with them. And then they're like, my mum would like to cook for you. And I'm like, oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, 100%. But I was going to say, this is also what makes you a really good journalist and storyteller. It's like wanting the connection, wanting to listen, wanting to learn. These are huge factors, right? And then, and I think everybody's just been starved for connection this year. And I think that's
what I miss
one of the unusual.
It's not
and travel, just even being able to move around freely, having random conversations.
Yeah.
So then what would you tell your younger self about adventuring or learning from others around the world? Or
probably that. Just, have the confidence to speak to people and talk to people and never judge people for how much money they've got or not enough money or no money, because everybody has a story. Everybody's gotten somewhere from their past for a reason. It doesn't make them a bad person or a good person where they are. And meeting people and talking to people, you just never know what value you're going to get out of someone. It could be as simple as a meal, or that person could help you get directions to go somewhere, or that person could help you. And I think in life, that's such a valuable thing too, is to just not judge people at all, from, what country they come from, where they're from, what they look like, how much money they've got, because you just don't know. And that's one thing as I've traveled, and even now in business and in corporate. And I've worked in corporate as well. And the ones that you think got all the money, they're not great people. And the ones that don't have the money are usually the nicer people. And you just, it's just.
Well, what is the thing? It's you never know what somebody else is going through. And certainly with travel, through all this terrible, between governments and certain bad media, it's they've put different kind of stereotypes on all types of things, which are absurd because people fundamentally have the same priorities in terms of family and health and all that stuff. And then all the rest is just kind of semantics or part of the social makeup of where they were from. And that's the really interesting stuff to explore.
Yeah, we're all so much more similar than we are different. And I think that's what travel teaches you, is that, wherever we go around the world, the one thing I noticed everywhere we go, in every country we go to, we are all so much more similar than different.
100%. And kind of based on this topic, sort of diversity in women. So this is going to be kind of the final part. I'm crafting the end here a bit different because this is the big thing that we always talk about, and I kind of wanted to put it here. So both Cidonie and I have worked in media or around media for decades, right? And because of our age, we were there at the preface of when things started changing to digital, when what the online content was shifting to, understanding all forms of media, advertising, marketing, in a hurry. We were there because of when we started, sort of Gen Xers, kind of going on that trip, and then having all this experience. And we were just kind of having this conversation about, after all this time, there's still not enough women at the helm of all these like media changes. Certainly not, in travel, I always say it's so funny because the biggest consumers of products and booking travel are women by far. They're like the largest decision makers. You can look at a million different reports on this, and there's still not enough. There's no direct conversation happening there. There's very few focus outlets on there. Certainly when it comes to diversity, I mean, that's a whole other issue. Those voices aren't there, and women are the cultural storytellers and decision makers from a financial perspective on that. And when we were talking about specifically content as in TV, which kind of segues into the next thing you're about to do, which you can tell everybody in a minute, is that there's still very few, like if you're like us and you watch all kinds of travel or cultural shows, it could be like a chef hosted show, it could be a travel hosted show. There's like very, very few women that are hosting. And even now, the only ones I can think of, like there was one, I'm totally blanking on her name, the great chef out of California. She had her show on Netflix. And then there was, Samantha Brown's been around for a million years, kind of holding it down at PBS. And Padma Lakshmi, who I mentioned in the last podcast as well, somebody I was speaking with earlier, had to like work for years to get her show, her travel food show on Hulu. And then I keep on watching how all these other male comedians are getting renewed hosting gigs for their travel shows on all these platforms, and I don't understand it. So I'm trying to carve out opportunities there, but this kind of, and I know you have a lot to say about it too, but you just told me that you are actually going to be shooting a travel show as well.
Yeah. So the one, it's interesting. The one I'm doing, it just came on my lap. It's a really interesting project that just started here. It's called Adventure All Stars. And it's a philanthropist here has started it, and it's going to go worldwide. I think it's starting in Australia and New Zealand. And it's to do with Charity TV Global. So it's a charity organization. And what he's done is basically put together a travel TV show where a group of people can nominate for a charity, and you're being involved. There's like 10 of us. I think they're like going towards raising money for our nominated charity. We raise a certain amount of money in the community. So it's a very community spirited project based. I have to raise money, go to businesses, ask for sponsorship. There's a whole lot of sponsorship programs that they can be involved in. And then what they do is they take you away to a secret location and they do a travel series show on 10 people, and they throw them into all sorts of different adventure travel situations, and they shoot you. So basically it's all about giving back and for charity. So it's a philanthropy kind of like idea project, but it was just really interesting that I thought this is starting up in the time of travel. And it kind of, for me, it kind of like, I got nominated to do it, and for me, it was ticked both boxes. A was travel. I was like, anything for travel, that'd be great. And two, it was for charity. So it wasn't a TV show. It was like all for fame and all for like, it wasn't like we're going to put you on a TV show to make you famous. And it wasn't about, or winning money. It wasn't about that. It's all about raising money for charity. And I just thought we're coming into such an interesting time in the world where, we're all going through such hardships with what's happening with the world, and it is time to give back. And this was an interesting project where I thought they've done it very well. They've combined both interests together. I don't know how it'll go. I will let you know. We're not filming until early next year, but I'm raising.
You're going to be fantastic.
For this year, raising money. That's what I'm doing, and I can put a link on after this so you can donate to my.
Please do. Well, as soon as you said you were doing this, I'm like, of course you are, because you're the perfect person for this. And this kind of goes back to, I've had this conversation with so many women too lately, where all of us have all this experience, and oftentimes when we're talking to people about work and this and this and that, they're like, "Oh, you have too much experience," and we're like, "Wait, what?" We just went through all of this, and for you too, it's like. You're a speaker, you're a journalist, you've like literally built content programs, like you understand travel, like you're like the perfect person for this and so many other projects. And so to my earlier point, I just want, like, why aren't all these people being then used as advisors or,
why?
getting more funding for projects?
Right. And it's not against men at all. I feel like, and I don't know, in my experience, I've actually, and this is the thing that I don't think you're saying the brands and the are getting is that in my experience, and especially with the expats and especially with men in business, men have probably traveled more in the fact that they've had the means to travel with business opportunities, and they've had the means to travel with work a lot more just by being in those levels of CEO corporate where they've had to travel. But if you talk to any of those guys, and I know many of them, most of their travel experiences are huddled up in a hotel doing corporate Zoom calls, and they're not traveling. They're not in the community. They're not spreading the word about that beautiful experience of that country, and they're not doing the promotion and publicity of that. Who is? Their wives. It's their wives who are going to the countries with them and traveling. And you talk to expats, and that's the thing. Like, there's so many different travelers doing so many things. We've got, we talked about the young ones backpacking, and that's, everyone's doing that. And then everyone sort of, it peters off, travel peters off, and you might go as family holidays. Again, you're doing the family holiday together once you've got kids, or you might go, with a partner. And that's great too. But more and more and more, I'm finding that, the women are doing girls' trips around the world. They're doing fantastic women's trips. There's a lot of women who are traveling to all over the world when we can, and doing really adventurous trips. And a lot of the women I know have done so much more travel than their husbands. And it's the women who are booking the trips. It's the women who do the research. It's the women for the family trips. And and that's predominantly what's happening. Women do the research, they do the trip, they get it all together, they get it all organised, and then they go on the trip. But it's predominantly the women who make the decisions on all those.
It's funny, and I'll slip this into the podcast, because in entertainment, more and more women in Hollywood have made production companies, especially people like, not just regular production, but are doing a whole bunch of buying book rights, launching content programs, et cetera, et cetera. So you have people like Reese Witherspoon with her Hello Sunshine, Nicole Kidman with Blossom Films. You have Drew Barrymore with all of her multimedia things happening these days. Oh my God, she's everywhere. And I brought up Padma before, and I think there's just an opportunity to greenlight so many more things. And I'm wondering, they're doing all these shows, that maybe this is a good time for pitching more cultural and travel initiatives to these types of outlets beyond just like a TV or film, but all the non-traditional content as well. So for people out there listening, you have a good idea. I think coming out of this pandemic, it's a good time to start pitching those ideas, because it doesn't always have to be a long form show. It can be a multimedia series. It could be a podcast. It can be an IGTV series.
That's right? It. And this show that I'm involved in, it's going to be very small. It's not like a huge series. And they've got a really interesting concept where they take a group of 10 people and everyone gets like a week of airtime. So it's not like it's going to be weeks and weeks on end. I'll be on one episode of the series of 1 week, and that's it. So it's a really interesting new multimedia way to produce TV in a philanthropic way and get people excited about donating to a good cause and travel and show somewhere around Australia. And I don't even know where we're going yet. And then they're going to take us to some place around Australia and throw us into a whole lot of adventure travel things. So
I'm very excited for you. I can't wait to see that.
Yeah.
And so aside from that trip, this is how I'm gonna end the pod. So aside from wherever they're sending you, let's say you're headed to your next dream destination. You don't have to tell us where that is. What's your theme song? What's the book you're bringing? And what's one luxury item you're bringing?
Oh, I don't have a theme song. I didn't do that well, did I? Luxury item, I would always bring my MacBook Air, because I just can't help but I would need to blog the whole way through it when I travel. I'm always blogging. Theme song, I'm so bad with podcasts at the moment. I'm just listening to podcasts, not playlists. So I don't have any new music.
That can count. That's all right.
I hate podcasts. It has to be podcasts. And book, it'd have to be, look, I'm terrible with books too. I usually grab something at the airport on the way.
Well, listen, because you said that you wanted to be on an island somewhere. You're going to be so relaxed. You're probably not going to be doing any of those things. You'll just be laying out on a beach, enjoying the good life, but obviously
blogging about my relaxing times underneath a coconut palm tree.
But where you are right now also sounds heavenly, and I can't wait to be able to visit there one day and see you in person and continue all of our many world domination discussions.
Love to have you.
I'm so glad you joined us.